Now that's a pretty ugly hole, and the idea of repairing that might seem a little bit daunting, but actually it's easier than you may think.
I'll begin by measuring the hole at its widest point. Add 1.5 inches to all sides, then transfer those dimensions to a piece of drywall. Drywall is actually quite easy to cut. Using a straight edge, cut through the paper on the face of the wallboard using a sharp utility knife. Then flip the board over and tap it on the backside in roughly the same place you scored the front. Fold the drywall and cut it on the crease. You'll notice that the patch is a good deal larger than the hole. There are a couple of good reasons for that. I'll explain in a moment. I flip the patch over and cut scoring marks on all 4 sides, about 1.5 inches from the edge. Now I'm going to break away the drywall along the score lines. Then peel off the paper backing and the inner gypsum core, leaving the front paper intact.
So now we've got a patch, and actually what we've done is use the paper on the front of this piece of sheetrock as tape to seal the joint. I'll explain that more in a minute. Now, 2 important points here. I cut the patch before I cut the hole into the wall, and also you notice the patch is considerably larger than the hole itself. And I'll show you why in a second.
I center the patch over the hole in the wall, mark the top with a T, then trace the outline of the patch on the wall. In a sense, the patch is a template for the section I'll be cutting out. This wallboard saw has a sharp tip that's designed to penetrate drywall when pressure is applied and the saw is twisted. Once the saw has penetrated, I cut along the line on all 4 sides and remove the piece I've cut out. Now you can see the reason I've made the patch larger than the hole. The damage is much greater at the backside. Next, I'll test fit the patch, making sure to put the T at the top to ensure that it's properly oriented. To make sure the patch is supported on the backside, I'm installing these pieces of scrap wood. I think plywood works best here. Then attaching the wood with drywall screws.
Now this is joint compound.
I'm applying a layer of it on all 4 sides of the opening. Notice that I'm keeping the putty knife fairly flat so that I spread the compound without scraping it off. I also apply joint compound to the edges of the opening. Next, I place the patch into the opening and push firmly. Then, using the putty knife, press the paper on the front of the patch into the joint compound. Again, keeping the putty knife rather flat. After removing any excess material, I'll allow the joint compound to set up and then apply an additional coat using a wider putty knife. I apply slightly more pressure to the outside edge of the tool to taper the material from the patch to the surrounding wall.
All right, now I'm going to let this dry overnight. This is an air dry material. And then we'll come back tomorrow and sand this down. Now, once that joint compound is dry, I can sand it with a piece of regular sandpaper, or I can use this tool, which is an abrasive mesh that's designed specifically for sanding drywall.
The advantage of the mesh is that it has much less tendency to fill up with compacted dust. The next coat of joint compound is applied with an even wider knife, often called a joint knife. Here, again, the idea is to taper the joint evenly from the patch to the surrounding wall.
Okay, now I'll let that dry overnight, give it another light sanding tomorrow. It might need a 3rd coat, and when that 3rd coat is dry and sanded, it can be painted.
Once the compound is dry, it gets a final sanding and a coat of paint.
You know, it's hard to believe that we started with this, but we ended up with something like this.